The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde tells the story of a young, handsome man named Dorian Gray, who becomes enamored with his own beauty after seeing a portrait of himself painted by Basil Hallward. Influenced by the hedonistic philosophy of Lord Henry Wotton, Dorian wishes that the portrait ages while he remains forever young. His wish is granted, and as Dorian pursues a life of indulgence and moral corruption, the portrait reflects the decay of his soul, while he remains outwardly youthful. By the end, overwhelmed by guilt and horror at what he has become, Dorian attempts to destroy the portrait, but, in doing so, he kills himself. His body is found aged and withered, while the portrait is restored to its original beauty. Hatchet by Gary Paulson tells the gripping survival story of 13-year-old Brian Robeson, who is stranded in the Canadian wilderness after a plane crash. With only a hatchet to aid him, Brian learns to fend for himself, facing challenges like food scarcity and wild animals. Over 54 days, he develops resilience and self-reliance. Ultimately, he is rescued, emerging from the experience profoundly changed. Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens follows the life of Oliver, an orphan born in a workhouse in England. From a young age he faces hardship and abuse, first in the workhouse and then as an apprentice to an undertaker. After escaping to London, Oliver falls in with a group of young thieves led by the villainous Fagin. Despite being drawn into a world of crime, Oliver's inherent goodness helps him find protection from kind-hearted individuals like Mr. Brownlow and Rose Maylie. In the end, it is revealed that Oliver is of noble birth, and he is adopted by Mr. Brownlow, leaving behind the dark world of crime to live a happy, peaceful life. The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros begins with Esperanza Cordero, a young Mexican-American girl, moving with her family to a house on Mango Street, which she initially views with disappointment. Throughout the novel, Esperanza observes the lives of her neighbors and grapples with her own sense of identity, feeling confined by her neighborhood and societal expectations. She dreams of escaping to a better life. By the end, Esperanza realizes that while she longs to leave Mango Street, her roots are there, and she must return to help those who cannot leave. In Lord of the Flies by William Golding, a group of British boys are stranded on a deserted island. Ralph is elected leader and tries to maintain order and focus on rescue, but Jack forms a rival group that embraces savagery. As the boys descend into chaos and violence, Ralph becomes hunted by Jack's group. The novel ends with Ralph's rescue by a naval officer, leaving the boys to face the consequences of their actions and the loss of their innocence. The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka begins with Gregor Samsa, a traveling salesman, waking up to find himself transformed into a giant insect. This inexplicable metamorphosis radically alters his life and the dynamics within his family, who are repulsed and burdened by his new form. As Gregor struggles with his new reality and yearns for his family's acceptance, he becomes increasingly isolated and neglected. His condition worsens when he is severely injured by an apple thrown by his father, which becomes lodged in his back and festers. This injury, coupled with the emotional and physical neglect he suffers, ultimately leads to his demise. After his death, his family feels relieved and hopeful about their future, moving on from the ordeal with a sense of liberation. The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo begins with Quasimodo, a deformed and half-deaf bell ringer of Notre Dame Cathedral, who is scorned and isolated by society due to his appearance. The story is set in 15th-century Paris and explores themes of love, fate, and societal ostracism through the relationships Quasimodo forms with Esmeralda, a beautiful Romani woman, and other central characters. Despite his initial portrayal as monstrous, Quasimodo's innate kindness contrasts sharply with the cruelty of others. The novel tragically ends with Quasimodo's demise, as he chooses to die at the gravesite of Esmeralda, who was hanged unjustly, demonstrating his deep, unrequited love and loyalty towards her. 1984 by George Orwell opens with Winston Smith, a low-ranking member of the ruling party in the dystopian society of Oceania, where the government controls all aspects of life and surveils its citizens incessantly. Winston, initially a covert rebel against the party's totalitarian rule, keeps a diary of his subversive thoughts and embarks on an illicit love affair with Julia, a like-minded woman. By the end, after being arrested by the secret police, subjected to intense psychological torture, and brainwashed, Winston is broken and reconditioned to love the party leader, Big Brother. Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad begins with the narrator, Charles Marlowe, recounting his journey into the African interior as a steamboat captain for a Belgian trading company. Marlowe's mission is to find Kurtz, an ivory trader who has gone missing in the wilderness and is rumored to have acquired immense power over the local tribes. As Marlowe ventures deeper into the Congo, he witnesses the brutality and exploitation inflicted by colonialism on the African people. At the heart of the jungle, Marlowe discovers Kurtz, gravely ill and morally corrupted by his absolute power. The narrative ends with Marlowe returning to Europe, disillusioned by the horrors he has seen, and with Kurtz's final words, "The horror. The horror." echoing the profound darkness at the core of human nature and civilization. Macbeth by William Shakespeare follows the rise and fall of Macbeth, a Scottish nobleman. At the beginning, Macbeth is a loyal and brave soldier, but after hearing a prophecy from 3 witches that he will become king, his ambition is ignited. Encouraged by his wife, Lady Macbeth, he murders King Duncan to take the throne. Consumed by guilt and paranoia, Macbeth descends into tyranny, committing more murders to secure his power. By the end, Macbeth is isolated and faces rebellion from those he has wronged. He is ultimately killed in battle by Macduff, and order is restored to Scotland, marking his tragic downfall. The New Atlantis by Sir Francis Bacon begins with a group of European sailors who, after a long voyage, are stranded on the island of Bensalem, a utopian society that has developed advanced scientific knowledge and technologies hidden from the rest of the world. The story unfolds through the narration of one of the sailors as they learn about the island's institutions, values, and customs, particularly the central scientific institution called Salomon's House, which drives the island's knowledge and innovations. The narrative ends without a conclusion to the sailor's fate, focusing instead on the detailed description of Bensalem's societal structure and the implications of its scientific achievements for the betterment of society. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain follows the journey of Huck Finn, a young boy who escapes his abusive father by faking his death and fleeing down the Mississippi River. At the start, Huck is living under the guardianship of the widow Douglas, but feels constrained by her attempts to civilize him. He meets Jim, a runaway slave, and together they embark on a raft journey filled with moral dilemmas, danger, and encounters with conmen. By the end, Huck has grown morally, rejecting society's racist values and choosing to help free Jim, even if it means going to hell. Ultimately, Huck decides to head west, rejecting civilization altogether to maintain his freedom. The Odyssey by Homer is the epic tale of Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, and his long, arduous journey home after the Trojan War. At the beginning, Odysseus is stranded on the island of Ogygia, held captive by the nymph Calypso. Meanwhile, his wife Penelope and son Telemachus face suitors vying for Penelope's hand, believing Odysseus to be dead. Over 10 years, Odysseus encounters numerous obstacles, including the Cyclops, sirens, and the wrath of the sea god Poseidon. By the end, with help from the gods, Odysseus returns to Ithaca in disguise, defeats the suitors, and reunites with Penelope, reclaiming his home and kingdom. Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift follows Lemuel Gulliver, a ship's surgeon who embarks on a series of extraordinary voyages. At the beginning, Gulliver is shipwrecked on the island of Lilliput, where the inhabitants are tiny people. Throughout his travels, he encounters different societies, including the giants of Brobdingnag, the philosophical Laputans, and the rational Hoynes, a race of intelligent horses, contrasting with the brutish Yahoos. Each society reflects satirical commentary on human nature and politics. By the end, after living among the Houyhnhnms, Gulliver becomes disillusioned with humanity and returns home. Paradise Lost by John Milton is an epic poem that tells the biblical story of the fall of man. At the beginning, Satan and his rebel angels have been cast out of heaven after a failed rebellion and now reside in hell. Satan, driven by pride and vengeance, plots to corrupt God's newest creation, mankind. He sneaks into the Garden of Eden and tempts Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge, leading to the downfall of both Adam and Eve. By the end, Adam and Eve, though repentant, are expelled from paradise as punishment for their sin, but with hope for redemption through future salvation. In The Prince, Machiavelli provides a pragmatic guide for rulers on how to maintain power and control over their states. The work focuses on the qualities a successful leader should possess, emphasizing cunning, pragmatism, and sometimes ruthlessness rather than traditional moral values. The protagonist is not a single individual, but rather an archetypal prince or ruler. Machiavelli begins by addressing the qualities of an ideal ruler and how they can acquire power, particularly through force or inheritance. By the end, he advises that rulers must be willing to act immorally when necessary to preserve their state and power, suggesting that the end. Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs tells the story of John Clayton, born in the western coastal jungles of equatorial Africa to a marooned couple from England, Lord and Lady Greystoke. After his parents' death, the infant is adopted by Kala, an ape who raises him as her own. Named Tarzan, he grows up in the jungle, developing the skills and traits of both apes and humans. Throughout his adventures, he discovers his true identity through various clues left by his father, culminating in his learning of his noble lineage. By the end of the novel, Tarzan is a fully realized character, able to navigate both the jungle and human society. But he ultimately chooses his life in the jungle over civilization, after ensuring the safety and happiness of his love, Jane Porter. Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare is a tragic tale of two young lovers from feuding families in Verona. The play begins with Romeo Montague falling instantly in love with Juliet Capulet at a masked ball. Despite their family's long-standing hatred, the couple secretly marries with the hope of reconciling their feuding kin. However, a series of misunderstandings and ill-timed events lead to fatal consequences. In a desperate attempt to be reunited, both Romeo and Juliet end up taking their own lives, believing the other to be dead. The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne is set in 17th-century Puritan Massachusetts, where Hester Prynne is branded with a scarlet A for adultery. As she grapples with her public shaming, she emerges as a symbol of strength and resilience. Reverend Dimmesdale, the father of her child, succumbs to his guilt and reveals his sin before dying. Hester's husband, Chillingworth, obsessed with revenge, withers away after Dimmesdale's death, having lost his purpose. Hester continues to live her life in the same community, embodying forgiveness and moral complexity, while her daughter Pearl leaves for a new life, breaking free from the stigma of her origins. Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe follows the story of a brilliant scholar, Dr. Faustus, who becomes dissatisfied with the limits of human knowledge and turns to magic. At the beginning, Faustus is a respected academic who feels that traditional forms of learning have failed to fulfill him. He makes a pact with the devil, selling his soul in exchange for 24 years of unlimited knowledge and worldly pleasures, with the demon Mephistopheles as his servant. Throughout the story, Faustus experiences both the thrills and regrets of his decision, ultimately realizing the grave consequences of his deal. By the end, despite several chances for redemption, Faustus remains unable to repent, and he is dragged to hell as his time runs out, doomed by his own choices.